All right, guys, I'm back with another Jack Reacher book review. And so this week we're taking a look at Better Off Dead, the brand new novel put out by not only Lee Child, but his brother Andrew Child is along for the ride as well. Same as the last story that we got, as we know that Lee Child is handing over the reins to his brother. In fact, he even asked him to change his name in the same way that he did. So originally it's Andrew Grant. He changed his name. Originally it's Lee Grant. He changed his name to Lee Child. That's his pen name. And so his brother is Andrew Grant. And he said, look, man, if you're going to take over the books, you have to be Andrew Child. So he did that. I haven't been that big thus far on the collaboration books, the previous book and then this book. They definitely feel quite different. So let's just get into my review of this latest book. I think it just came out. I got it the day it came out, audio version. And let me say too, before getting started, something about the audiobooks. Now, if you've listened to any of my other reviews, you know I'm a huge fan of the original American version of the audiobooks, featuring Dick Hill as the voice actor reading. Absolutely love Dick Hill. I follow him on social media. I see all the goings on in his life, and he retired a few years back. And since then, Scott Brick has been reading the Reacher novels, and I gotta say, I'm coming around on Scott Brick. He's no Dick Hill for me, but I think he's good. I think he's better than the person that they have. I think it's John McClane or something like that they have reading the overseas version, at least the UK version of the audiobooks. I enjoy him much more than that voice actor. But I only have one gripe about Scott Brick. I think he does a good Reacher. I really do. Not quite the inflection that I get from Dick Hill. That's something I really liked, like the dramatic pauses and the, almost Victorian, almost like Shakespearean actor at times. I really like that. I really like that about Dick Hill. But Scott Brick does a very good job delivering a solid Reacher. The only gripe I have with him really is that he doesn't really change his voice much for other characters. He doesn't do accents as much the way that Dick Hill did. When it's a female character speaking, sometimes it's hard to tell because the female speaking doesn't have a different voice than the male speaking. Like Reacher sounds just like the female characters that he's talking to. So that's one thing I'm missing big time about Dick Hill that Scott Brick is not doing for me. But otherwise, I think he's doing a pretty damn good job. And, if we can't have Dick Hill, this is a pretty good substitute. So, with that being said, let's get into it. So, Better Off Dead. Yes, the title does sort of play into the story, but I also think, and maybe this is just me, injecting my own feelings into it, but I also think it was chosen as a sort of commentary on how some fans might be feeling about about Lee Child handing over the reins to his brother Andrew. For years, people have talked about whether or not Lee Child would eventually kill off his main protagonist. And I'm sure he had even contemplated it himself, whether or not, that would be a fitting end for Jack Reacher. But I think a lot of fans, given the last couple of books, and especially the last one, which was a collaboration of Lee and Andrew, knowing that this would be the last collaboration before Andrew takes over the series fully by himself, a lot of the fans, and I'm not saying I'm one of them, but a lot of the fans would probably rather have Reacher go out in a blaze of glory than to have another person author his adventures. Now, many of you know, and I just said a few minutes ago, that for the most part, I consume these stories via audiobook. And so I don't see the physical book, But one of the first things that stood out to me, and I'm sure it did with you physical book readers as well, is the length the length of this book. It's quite a bit shorter than what we're used to. Most books in the series, when converted to audio, fall somewhere between 12 and 16 hours. But this one only runs a little over 9. Now, that's considerable. I mean, that's like a reduction of somewhere in the neighborhood of like 25%. So right away, I was wondering, is this going to be better because of this change? Maybe it'll leave out some unnecessary things and really focus on things that make Jack Reacher, for us fans. Or were a lot of corners cut, maybe they just wanted to bang out a book. Or maybe, there's just nowhere else for the story to go. But I am curious to see what the page count will be in the future books authored solely by Andrew Child. I wonder if this is indicative of what we're going to get going forward, the shorter version. So the next thing that I noticed, and this wasn't right away, it took a little bit, but is this book is written in a way that a lot of us fans enjoy. It was written in first person, and it's not obvious because when the book begins, it is not in first person. And so it was a nice little surprise when it ends up being a first person perspective. And I thought that was actually a really nice touch. I enjoyed that little surprise, a chapter into the book, then it switches to first person. So about a quarter of the way through, I realized, one of the reasons that I believe the book was somewhat shorter than we were used to. And I think it was lack of description. Lee Child's writing style is very, very descriptive. And, with everything, places, buildings, and especially characters. And this book had some description of architecture, but I found it very lean on character description. In fact, I couldn't tell you what most of the characters look like when I'm thinking back on it now. There are a couple that stand out, a little bit, like the big guy that is the right-hand man or bodyguard of Dendonker. It makes a lot of sense to go a little harder on that description because, you want it to seem like a formidable foe for Reacher. The first thing I thought of when this character was being introduced was it reminded me of a character from one of the early novels named Paulie, who might be the biggest, baddest, and most formidable foe Reacher has ever faced one-on-one. But, other than being 6'6" and having a bald head and, the clothes he was wearing, I couldn't tell you anything else about the character, the one in this book. Now, Paulie, I can almost describe fully, but this guy, it just feels like it's a cheap imitation of Paulie. But he ain't no Paulie. That's for damn sure. Anyway, yeah, this book was pretty light on description, and I think that might account for a good portion of the missing words and pages. And so another thing that I notice in this book, and this may be a response to reader complaints, but more and more it seems as though Reacher is avoiding the use of guns. There are actually several times in the book when he opts to go unarmed, or where he discards a gun that he could potentially have used, and I find that a bit out of character. But as I said, it could be because in Reacher fan circles, I've noticed people complaining a bit about Reacher relying on guns too much in recent books. Now, to be honest, the use of guns doesn't bother me at all. It's well known that Reacher is a proficient shooter, and it would make sense that he would use that skill to his advantage. So that's never bothered me, Also, it makes sense to me that as Reacher ages, he might need to rely on weapons more and more. But at the same time, I do enjoy a good Reacher fist fight. And I'll take as many of those as you want to give me. And inevitably, less guns means more hand-to-hand combat. So I'm cool with it. All right, so the main antagonist, the big bad, if you will, Dendonker, was pretty damn weak. About 3/4 of the way through the book, I figured out, why I didn't think much of it. And it's because I didn't know him. A lot of the Reacher books, even the first person stories, we also get another perspective, usually from, the antagonist's point of view, or talking about the antagonist, a long description of where they're from and how they came to be. We get the background and the lore around them and the reputation. A really good example of this is in 61 Hours, when we spend a lot of time getting to know the main antagonist in that story, who's like a cartel kingpin. And, one of his main attributes is that he's very, very short and very sensitive to this fact. And anyone calling attention to it would be tortured or killed. But yeah, in this story, we don't get much at all about Dendonker. We get a little background on his ethnicity, and that's about it. Otherwise, he's just a regular-ass, mustache-twirling villain. And one more negative, and then I'm going to try to focus on the positive here. But I think the main thing, more important than anything missing from the story, is the deep thinking. Now, we usually get a lot of deep thinking from Reacher, and it's weird that they would leave that out, because you would think you would get even more of the deep thought and figuring things out, solving the mystery, with it being a first-person narrative. But no, we don't get much of that at all in this book. Also, kind of in the same vein, we don't get any of the knowledge deep dives that we get in most Reacher stories, where we find out a lot of detail and interesting information on a subject that's very specific, like learning about some really cool unknown history of some obscure thing, or finding out kind of, inside baseball info about a specific subject or trade. A good example of this one is in one of the stories a few books back. We get a serious deep dive on the dark web. And since Reacher knows nothing about the dark web, we get to find out all these facts that a lot of the readers probably don't know as well about the dark web. And so in that book, they tell us how it works and how it's used, etc. That's the best example I can think of right now of one of these information dumps. But it's in almost every single book, But yeah, we don't get much of that. I don't think we get any of that, really, in Better Off Dead. Okay, now, here's what I'll say overall. I'm not going to go into too many details because I know a lot of people have not read this book. I've pretty much given you as deep as I want to go on it. But generally, I think I put out a tweet last week right after I read it, immediately after, and I think it sums up my feelings on the book pretty damn well. So I'm just going to read that here. The latest Jack Reacher novel isn't bad. A little on the short side, and a notably different writing style, which makes sense given that Lee Child is slowly handing over the reins to his younger brother Andrew. But overall, I think the story is solid and much better than the previous book. I'm still worried that Reacher's best days are behind him, and that we will never again get the kind of stories that made us fall in love with the character. But I'm a romantic, and I'm holding out hope that Andrew Child will find his stride. All right. If you enjoyed this review, know that I have several more Jack Reacher book reviews here on the channel. And you can seek those out. I've got a playlist for them specifically. All you have to do is look for Jack Reacher book reviews on my channel. I'm a huge Reacher fan. I plan on covering all of the books eventually, including the short stories, and I'm definitely going to cover every episode of the Amazon series when it starts in detail. But Jack Reacher is not the only thing that I like, and so to reflect my more general fandom, this channel is about much more than Jack Reacher. I also cover a ton of stuff in entertainment and pop culture, and from time to time, I even share what I consider interesting stories from my questionable youth. So if you're interested in any of that, please subscribe to the channel, favorite or follow the podcast, and if you do decide to stick around, another thing that I like to do here is I like to put something out as often as possible. So if you decide to stick around and subscribe, favorite, or follow, then I will likely be talking to you again tomorrow. Thanks.